Hi there, fourth graders. I am making a video to read you The King's Equal by Katherine Paterson. And here we go. I'm going to start over. So here we go. Chapter 1. Many years ago, in a country far away, an old king lay dying. Now the king was very wise and very good, and all the people loved him. So they were sad to know that he would soon leave them. But what made them even sadder was the knowledge that the king's son, Prince Raphael, would become the next ruler. Prince Raphael was as rich and handsome as a prince should be. His father had assembled scholars from all over the world to teach him, so he was highly educated. The people should have been proud to have Raphael as their next king, but instead they were afraid. "Look at his eyes," they said, "and see the arrogance of a man who admires only himself. Look at his mouth," they said, "and see the sneer of a man who thinks everyone else is stupid. Look at his hands," they said, "and see the grasp of a man who thinks everyone else's goods are his for the taking." The old king, even while he was dying, understood the fears of his people. Just before the end, he called his son and all the counselors of the realm to come to his chamber. "My son," he said, "with my last words, I give you my blessing." "Well, of course," said Raphael, although he was far more interested in his father's lands and gold than he was in the king's last words. "You will become ruler when I die," the old king said, "for that is the ancient law that cannot be changed. But you will not wear my crown until the day that you marry a woman who is your equal in beauty and intelligence and wealth." Well, the prince was angry at his father's words. "That is not a blessing," he exclaimed. "That is a curse. Where shall I find a princess who is equal to me in every way?" Raphael demanded that the king take back this strange blessing. But the king shook his head, and that very night he breathed his last breath and died. Prince Raphael was so angry that he refused to mourn his father's death. When the counselors suggested that the flags be lowered and that the people be given time off from their work for the funeral, he was angrier still. "There will be plenty of time for a holiday when I am crowned king," he said. "Tell the people to get back to work." With heavy hearts, the counselors announced there would be no period of mourning for the beloved old king. The only comfort they had was that Raphael might never be crowned. For where would such an arrogant man find a woman who would admit he was his equal in every way? Chapter 2. At first, Raphael was too busy to think about the crown. He had to have his portrait painted. In fact, he had to have dozens of portraits painted to replace all the portraits of previous kings that hung in the palace and in the museums and in the schoolhouses. Ooh, that gave him another idea. He would close all the schools. Now that sounds good at first, but why should all those children be wasting their time trying to learn a dribble of that and a drabble of geography here and a dabble of math there? Wasn't he the most intelligent man in the world? "Put the children to work," he commanded. "From now on, I am doing the thinking for this country." But the thing that took the most time and that Raphael enjoyed the most was collecting taxes. First, he collected all the gold coins in the land. Then he collected all the silver. Next, he sent out his agents to gather all the livestock and grain and vegetables. These he sold at an enormous profit back to the people, who were forced to give him their last copper pennies to buy back their own meat and produce. Raphael grew richer and richer, while the people grew poorer and poorer. "Ah," he said, looking into the mirror one day, "I have everything. Beauty, intelligence, great wealth. I am the happiest man in the world." Just then, a little voice whispered inside him, "You do not have quite everything. You do not wear your father's crown." And Raphael remembered to be angry. That very day, he sent for the counselors. "You lazy fools," he said. "You heard my father's last words. Why haven't you found me a wife?" The counselors trembled from their wigs to their boot tips. What should they do? If they did not find the prince a wife, he would be angry. If they did find him a wife, would he believe her to be his equal? How can we find a woman who is equal to you, O prince? They asked. You who were matchless in beauty and intelligence and wealth. That is your problem, said Raphael. And if you do not solve it by the end of the year, you shall all be thrown into the dungeon until your flesh rots and falls from your bones. The frightened counselors sent messengers all over the lands, across the seas, to search out the most beautiful princesses in the world. They brought them to the palace for Raphael to examine. There was a princess whose hair was spun like sunlight, falling across her shoulders down to her waist. There was a princess whose eyes sparkled like lavender pools in the moonlight. There was a princess with the skin of alabaster. The prince admired the hair of the first, the eyes of the second, and the skin of the third. But he was not satisfied. Faugh, he shouted. You can't reassemble princesses, taking a bit of each. There is not a single creature here who could cast a shadow across my back, much less one who could stand beside me without shame to the dungeon with you all. At these words, the counselors trembled from their wigs to their boot tips. But the wisest counselor said, If it please you, O prince, there are still 9 months before the year comes to a close. Besides, how can we search for your queen from the dungeon? Well, Raphael was not pleased, but he had to keep his word, for according to the ancient law, the word of the ruler cannot be changed. Once again, the counselors sent messengers across the lands and the seas. This time, they were commanded to search out the most intelligent princesses in the world. They brought them to the palace for Raphael to examine. There was a princess who could name the capital of every country in the world. That is nothing, said Raphael. She can't spell pterodactyl. There was a princess who could multiply 4-digit numbers in her head without using her fingers. That is nothing, Raphael said. She can't tell a tweedledum from a tweedledee. Then there was a princess who knew geography and mathematics and could recite the names of the dates of every emperor from the Byzantine for 1,000 years. That is nothing, said Raphael. She doesn't know how to play backgammon. Besides, she has the face of a duck-billed platypus. To the dungeon with all. Again the counselors trembled from their wigs to their boot tips, and again the wisest of them protested. If it please you, O prince, there are still 6 months left in the year, he said. Besides, how can we search from the dungeon? Well, the prince was not pleased, but he had to keep his word according to the ancient law. This time the counselors were ill with anxiety. They sent out 3 times the number of messengers and found at least 3 princesses. One was the daughter of a king who owned so much land that there was no one alive who knew how to measure the vastness of his domain. The second was the daughter of a king who owned a fleet of ships that sailed around the world, bringing back fortunes every time it returned. The third was the daughter of a king who owned diamond mines. She was dressed in diamonds from head to her toes. Each of her shoes was cut from a perfect single diamond. At first, Raphael seemed pleased. He had never seen so much wealth before. He could not choose among the 3 princesses. I shall marry all 3, he said greedily. But though the counselors trembled from their wigs to their boot tips, the bravest of them said, You must choose one wife. There can only be one queen in our land, for that is the ancient law that cannot be changed. Well, Raphael became angry. Then I will not marry any of these. They are stupid and ugly, which is not nice to say. To the dungeon, all of you, and take these useless girls with you. The wisest counselor once more reminded Raphael of his word, for there were still 3 months left in the year. None of the counselors were cheered by this, but they had searched the world over, and they were sure there was no one whom Prince Raphael would regard as his equal. The counselors did not bother to send out any more messengers. Instead, they began to put their affairs in order, for they knew that when the end of the year came, they would surely be cast into the dungeon until their flesh rotted and fell from their bones. All right, I'm going to stop at the end of chapter 2. I'll pick up with 3 and 4 next time we meet. Bye-bye.